Hello to wherever you are in the world. This is your host, the Flimsy Artist, aka Dimitri. And today we're back with another episode of Author's Purpose, where I ask authors what's the purpose of their stories. And today I have the amazing author of What Comes After, also known as King Impo. So, for our first question, could you just tell me why did you decide to come on the podcast today?
So very few people in real life sort of know that I write, and I like to sort of keep my writing a bit identity a bit anonymous. I don't really have a lot of opportunities to talk about my book with others. So when I saw your offer in my inbox, I thought it was yeah, it's an amazing opportunity to finally talk about my work and also hear sort of how did you feel about it and sort of what your takes are.
Mhm. Okay, okay. So all authors have to read. So what are you reading now?
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I have not read much fiction recently.
Even
I
if
think
it's
the last
nonfiction.
fictional book, yeah, nonfiction I have read more recently. But it was mostly for school.
Hmm.
During summer, I took a course on environmental literature, so I got to read a lot of sort of classic from American environmental studies. Stuff Silent Spring or other more contentious works
Hmm.
like yeah, I forgot what it was called, but I really hated that book and I just ripped into it with my essay. But that's the latest sort of books I've read.
Hmm. Okay, then what was the last fiction piece you read?
Fiction. I think it was either Red, White, and Royal Blue,
Ooh.
or it was Annihilation.
Hmm.
Which are two totally different categories.
Hmm.
But I really loved Annihilation. I thought Red, White, and Royal Blue was nice, but I didn't like the politics of it
Hmm.
because I thought it was really inaccurate.
Interesting, interesting. I've been wanting to read Red, White, and Blue for the longest. It's been in my to read list, and I haven't touched it. So that's why I said But the last thing I've read, far as nonfiction, it's right next to me. I'm looking at it. Would have been creating character arcs. It's very interesting. It makes me think about my characters in a different light. So I do like this book. But sometimes I'll be like, what? I just be like, what? Question mark. What are you going on about? And then the last
Yeah.
fiction piece I've read would have to been your book. So I finished it
Oh,
like
nice.
I finished it like right in the beginning of um the year actually. I was sitting down with my boyfriend and we were reading we weren't reading it together. I was more so just dictating what was happening to him. And
Mm-hmm.
um the last book besides that will be the first to die at the end because I'm obsessed. But
Yeah, yeah.
um so could you tell us about the cover, cuz I think what got me interested in your book was definitely the cover. I definitely was just scrolling and was like, okay, I'm starting Author's Purpose back up. Who should I interview? And then I saw your cover and I was just like, this one.
Oh wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I actually made this cover just on Canva. I was just kind of sort of experimenting with it. I would say that I have wanted to change the cover just a little bit
Mhm.
to sort of reflect my sequel. Just I found that when I first made the cover, I didn't have a really high quality image of the moon to use that
Mhm.
I found for my sequel. So I've always wanted to change it, but I do like the current design of it, just because I think it really captures sort of, I wanted like the moon to essentially be sort of front and center because it's like, the focal point of the novel, like what happened, if the moon was like knocked closer to the earth
Hmm.
and, the sunset was sort of just like, it sort of references the time of the day when that basically happened. And yeah, that's sort of like how I kind of designed my cover.
Hmm. So, like, is there like any like sometimes authors like to play with meaning in their covers? Is there any deeper meaning, or is this just like a replica of that scene?
There is also like a deeper meaning when it comes to sort of it sort of coincidentally sort of coincides with some of the thematic elements of the book because of the sort of it shows sort of this like descent into darkness, if you will, like as the apocalypse like worsens.
Hmm.
Because it starts off in the sunset with my first book, and then my sequel. The background is now the twilight. Now the background is now twilight, and it's sort of like things are just slowly getting worse, which is kind of the big sort of thematic element
Hmm.
of my book.
Hmm. Like, okay, I'm not gonna lie. The one thing that I kind of like, I was really gagged, I was really gooped, and I really loved, um, was like how I don't even know if this is intentional, but as the story progressed, we have like a very pure main character that is always trying to help people and always telling the truth, and then he kind of just slowly starts lying more and more and more until it becomes like one of the main conflicts of the story. And I'm not gonna lie, the way it was written, I was just thinking like on some level that would be all of us because we're like trying to fight our morals, like our societal morals of like we have to help the elderly, we shouldn't steal, but we're also trying to survive. And I just really like how it was done because like with your writing as a whole in this book, it's like it plays a thin line of being like it makes the dystopian like world into a contemporary. And I was just like multiple times in your book I was just sitting here scratching my head like how does this feel like a regular YA contemporary novel, like we're just going to high school, but it's in this setting where the moon is literally tearing the earth apart. So I have to I have to applaud you for that because I don't think I could have done that. Um,
Wow, thanks, thanks.
so
Yeah, I'm super flattered.
so why are you deciding like do you want this into a print format where people can buy it or maybe just a print format for you to have? Why would you want that or why wouldn't you?
Um, so I will say that technically I can't make it a print novel because I do borrow a concept from a different series.
Mhm.
Sort of the moon being hit by the asteroid is actually a concept that was from the Life as We Knew It series.
Mhm.
So in its current form, it technically cannot be published because that would be, copyright infringement because, the big sort of disaster is not my original idea.
Mhm.
But I have thought about making it an original series, and I think when it comes to the big sort of concepts, it would require some adjustments, primarily concentrated like in the first few chapters. But sort of as of the moment, like it's kind of off the table right now.
Mhm.
But if I were to try to pursue that, I do have like sort of the pieces in place, if you will, to kind of divorce the sort of the real like the sort of the like asteroid hitting the moon concept as the way the moon is sort of moved close to the Earth to to some other different cause that preserves a lot of my work while not really infringing on sort of what an author already thought of herself.
Mhm. Okay. And so I kind of already know the answer just from us talking, but did you always want to be an author or did this like kind of just fall onto you?
I mean, when I was younger, I really liked to write stories.
Mhm.
But I think like around middle school age, I just kind of stopped. But I think during that middle school era, that really like was my first step towards writing in the sense because I became obsessed with Hunger Games fan fiction.
Mhm.
Like, I spent an entire summer, like my seventh grade summer, was just me at home reading Hunger Games fan fiction, and that sort of got me looking at like, oh, like you don't have to be like a professional author for you to write books.
Mhm.
And so then in high school, I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna write my own Hunger Games fan fiction, and it was very, very bad. Like I have just deleted it off the internet. It was the dialogue was super cheesy, descriptions were super overdone. It was really derivative, honestly.
Mm.
But that was sort of my first foray into authorship, and it was a starting point, I would say. Yeah.
Well, kind of spooked me there because I have had pretty much the exact same. I feel like
Wow.
instead of Hunger Games fanfics, it was more Billie Eilish fanfics. But other than
Oh
that,
wow.
spot
Okay.
on. Like, back in 2019, I wrote my first like Billie Eilish fanfic, and then I kind of adapted it because I always wanted to be a published author. Um, because I've been writing since I was like 5. So I always wanted to be a published author. So I was like, let me write this book while everybody was writing it. And that was trash. Like, it was like you said, it was very derivative, and it was more so like me throwing all of the cliches I could think of and story tropes into one story, and then
Uh,
sprinkling in a little bit of queerness, and then that was that. And then later, the like mid to late half of 2019, I realized, wow, I can't even publish this if I want to because this is literally a fanfic. So then I wrote my own original book, and that did really good on Wattpad. And then I was getting scared because I was getting it was like it was putting a lot of pressure on me. Mind you, I was starting college at the time,
mhm.
so it was putting
Yeah.
a lot of pressure on me to like update weekly and keep up with my college work. So I just kind of took it off the internet and start tweaking it behind the scenes, and now it's ready to be published. So we'll see when that's get published.
Oh, nice, nice. Congrats.
Thank you. So why specifically Wattpad? Why not like Inkit or a different type of site?
Um, honestly, because Wattpad was like the first thing that popped up. Like when I was like, where can I publish original like ish works like online?
Mhm.
And Wattpad was the first one that popped up, and it was free. And I was like, you know what? Let's just join it. And I think the reason I sort of stuck with it, I think a large part of it had to do with the super supportive and super like vibrant, like the community forums that unfortunately have been closed
Mhm.
by Wattpad and still remain closed. I don't think they're going to open it up, which I think is really unfortunate because I think I credit that sort of community helping me introduce myself to many different authors and really improve my craft.
Mhm. Solid. So, how would you describe your writing style?
I would say, especially for like what comes after, like I really love the hybrid diary style for writing,
Mhm.
which is it's a sort of a technique that sort of brings together like really traditional sort of dialogue scenes, but with a diary style like spin to it. I mean, it does require some suspension of belief, if you will, because like of course nobody can remember so much dialogue. No one can write that fast. But I really like the way it sort of brings this really grounded, this really naturalistic feel when telling your stories, because it's almost as if you were sort of documenting really like this is like a document about sort of the apocalypse or about like a teenager's experience during the apocalypse, other than making it feel sort of like able to divorce yourself and be like, oh yeah, this is like a fictional story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also like sort of really connects to like sort of how I like to write my main characters because he's like a bit sort of a bit closed off, if you will, and this sort of diary style writings when it comes to like really closed off characters can really help sort of see your inner thought, their like inner thoughts, like in a way that's not super accessible
Mm-hmm.
for like typical narration. And I guess outside of that writing, I just generally prefer to write a bit, a little casually, more casual than I do for academic, a bit sort of easier to write. Just I like to make my writing really accessible for people so that you can feel really the emotional sort of core of the story rather than getting a little bit bogged down in sort of the puzzle of the words, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So how has
Yeah.
that writing style evolved over the years? Because if I'm correct, you can correct me. The novel finished about 2 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think I've generally tried to keep it kind of consistent. I
Mm-hmm.
think it definitely has changed though. Even across like the first book, it has changed quite a bit. I think the first sort of seven-ish chapters have a really
Mm-hmm.
distinct writing style because I wrote those together, and then I think anything past chapter 12 on that book is also really different because there was a big gap between chapter 12 and 13 because I took like 5 months off to write college essays.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was like this big, there's definitely like a shift between 12 and 13 when it comes to the writing style. But I think from sort of chapter 13 onwards, even into my sequel, my writing style has generally remained pretty consistent, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because I did like
Yeah.
notice a a shift within the book with this writing style, particularly in between 12 and 13. And I'm looking at my notes.
Mm.
Most of my commentary from then was just like how like long the chapters got. Like I used to like spend like
Yeah.
yeah, like 30 minutes to 20 minutes on the beginning chapters, and then I realized like, oh, I read this in for a whole hour. And I think that's I don't think I know that's a good thing because even though this chapter was like twice as long and it took me an hour to read this, whereas the older chapters took me 30 minutes, it never felt like you were putting in filler or it felt like the story was getting bogged down. It still felt like it was going just as quick. So I was really impressed by that, honestly.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie,
That's really nice to hear.
sometimes I was like, I was getting whiplash because like it was one chapter. It was like most of the chapters were like at least 30 minutes, and it was just like one chapter that I read in 20 minutes. And I don't know if that I was just reading that really fast or something, but I was just like, wow, I finished that chapter. But that was the only time where I was just like, okay, where are we? Where are we? But
Hmm.
so in general, how do you develop your plots? Do you kind of go and do you go in mind with it? Like, do you already know what you're doing, or do you kind of just go as you go?
Hmm. Yeah, that's like a great question. I mean, I think it's a little complicated. I will say that I do not enjoy plotting, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my first works, like after I ditched my Hunger Games fanfic, was I tried to write a fantasy novel,
Mm-hmm.
and because fantasy novels are really intricate and have a lot of lore, there was a lot of plotting that needed to be done. And what happened was I got really bogged down in plotting, and I made zero progress on my story. I was just like coming up with all this world lore, but I was not like the I wasn't really like working on my story in a sense, and that felt really deflating to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of removed what I find really fun about writing, which is like really spontaneous, super like organic development of your story.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of after that point, I've kind of not like kind of avoiding really plotting anything. There are a couple exceptions where I have loosely plotted stuff. I think the best example would be the sort of last like four-ish chapters of what comes after, when I really wanted to I just created really short summaries about how I wanted to advance the central plot, sort of driving the last section of the novel, and let sort of the other side plots develop a little more organically. But I think where I do plot a lot more is within a chapter, because I generally try to center chapters around some type of like thematic element. And in that case, like, I do like to have like a good structure for how I'm writing a chapter, but not necessarily applying that for my whole story, if that makes sense.
It does. So I kind of want to know, so is this for, did you do this for what comes after, or was this like a special case where you made an exception?
I think I think because like what comes after is sort of my only like completed book. It's sort of the only writing process that I really like use. When I sometime in the future when I try writing sort of a different series, then I might sort of take a look and see like whether I should use a different writing style or not. But I think sort of this formula has been what I've been using for this series.
Okay. For far as me, I've written many books. I need to start publishing them because I have like 10 books in the catalog that are ready to be published. I'm just like not doing it for some reason.
Oh, wow.
For me, honestly, when it comes to like my contemporary books, because I like the genre hop because my books are all connected. Um, so like in my contemporary books, most of that is just me writing, like me just starting with a cool idea and I just wrote from there, and that's how the story developed. But for my more like sci-fi slash fantasy stuff, I have to like I sat down like some of these books I've planned 6 7 years ago. So like
Uh-huh.
it's really like I feel like
Wow.
for me as an author, it's like learning all of the tools, not just learning how to use a hammer, but learning how to use a wrench, and then just knowing what this story needs. But in the beginning, I will say that most of my, especially my fanfic, my trashy fanfic, was just me like, it would be cool if Billie Eilish did X, and then just wrote a chapter around that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no. I agree.
So I want to know, how do you use social media as an author? How do you use Wattpad to elevate your platform and to like highlight the ideals that you care about?
I will say that I barely use social media at all, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think Wattpad was really my first like social media. And because like I'm not super familiar with how to use social media, I really just use Wattpad to just like announce like, hey, we've got a chapter up,
Mm-hmm.
or I might sort of use Wattpad, like especially a lot of like the clubs on Wattpad, like a lot of the book reading clubs, like use it to connect with different authors and give people feedback, which I really like doing, just like looking at other people's writing.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like using Wattpad as like purely as like a social media platform, or just using other social media platforms in general for my writing, is not something like I'm super familiar with. So
Mm-hmm.
I generally don't do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, I will say like one of the reasons why I chose you, because I read a lot of Wattpad books. Yeah, I'm kind of sick in the head, but yeah, I read a lot of Wattpad books, and one of the reasons why I chose you specifically is because I do like how you go about like, okay, I have a new chapter. Okay, I'm taking a break. I'm sorry guys, I haven't been here in 3 months, but school's been stressful. And I don't know. I just love to see that in an author. So I always try to prioritize those authors over authors that just post books. Because I do feel like if you're going to, the difference between a writer and an author in my mind is an author is building a community around their books. And I definitely felt like a community was being around built around what comes after. And I feel like that's one of the reasons it won a lot of awards that it won. But moving on
Wow,
to the
and
next
yeah.
question. How did you feel when your book got shortlisted? Like that's a big deal.
I was so surprised
Mhm.
because like I was like I got the email like that my like book was shortlisted. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I actually got shortlisted because I'd only applied for the Ys like one other time, and that was like in 2019, and I didn't get any awards, and I thought like it was kind of hopeless. And then so just seeing it getting shortlisted, it was just like super happy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so why did so no, I said that I feel like it got shortlisted because I do feel like your writing, first of all, the three things that I feel like made it get shortlisted is the writing. Like the writing is so on key. Like I really don't understand how you managed to make like this homey contemporary feel in a dystopia. Literally the world's falling apart. And I just feel like, oh, this is normal day life. And two, I do feel like with the way you write, it just encourages people to comment. Like it was multiple times that I just wanted to go and be like, just write out a paragraph about stuff that was happening in the book. Like one of the time I was really like livid was, not gonna lie, the ending. But I kept all the comments to myself because I try to
Oh
make it a
yeah.
rule not to comment on people's stuff, because if I want you on the podcast, I don't want any pre-exposure. I just want to randomly DM you and just see if you respond or not.
Uh,
And three, that key tip right there, key tip right there. If I'm responding to your Wattpad book, then don't ask to be on the podcast because that means I have a relationship with you. Um, and then three, I just feel like you, like I don't even know how to describe it. The way your characters evolve is something that I don't see typical of Wattpad books. Usually, especially even with the people that I interview, the characters they evolve at the end, but it's like a one trick no. And I feel like the you had truly dynamic characters. That's what I'm saying. Your characters really felt like it was complex. It really didn't feel like A to B in that sense. It felt like A to A.1, A.3. Okay, let's go back to A.1. Then we ended up at B. Like it didn't feel like I was being preached to. So I feel like those are the three reasons for
um,
me that your book got the short list. But why do you think it got it?
um, yeah, no, I think that you kind of hit upon some of the stuff that I'm really happy about with my book. I think one way I really try to approach my characters is, I like to treat them as sort of like real people in the sense, and in the way that like I think one of my favorite mottos when it comes to writing characters is like the idea that everyone really has a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to really highlight sort of like the sort of an atypical experience of the apocalypse, if you will, because normally like when you see books centered around the end of the world, you have your really big sort of action star heroes, if you will, like Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead or Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to like maybe show like a perspective of like here is like a family that is trying to make the best out of the scenario, and that they're just like really ordinary people, with obviously with a lot of flaws, but they're not like the super exceptional, but they're just trying to make life happen. And that's what I found just like really compelling for sort of my reasons for writing the story, and I'm really glad that you had it really resonate with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell us about your college life because you are a college junior. Like, what's your major? Like, what are you trying to get out of college?
Yeah, totally. I'm an environmental sciences major. I'm a third year student, and I'm also a data sci minor. And, for me, environmental science is really the major I chose because I really wanted to sort of combine my sort of passion for like natural sciences with just like a look at sort of how humans have impacted the world, especially how they've impacted sort of natural ecosystems,
Mm-hmm.
is what my big sort of focus is. And I'm hoping that I can get into grad school and really do pursue my own research project, which is yeah, it's something I'm really looking forward to.
That's in like oof, kind of new shivers. I think like this is a whole side tangent, but I do think like as humans, we need to really start looking at what we're doing to our planet and reducing our emissions particularly because it's like at the rate we're going, we're not gonna have a Earth to live on. We're gonna have something like your book going to happen to our Earth. We're gonna get so hot that we won't be able to live here. So for you to actually be majored in that and to go out there and want to change that, that's inspiring to me because me on the other hand, I'm more like the thing that I'm doing in college right now is pre-med, pre-law. I don't know why I decided to do
All
both at the
right.
same time. And I'm more looking to change policies and laws that affect us. And I feel like I put the pre med in there because I really want to understand the mind. Because I feel like a lot of the issues we're having with understanding that climate change is a big deal, it comes from ignorance or it comes from not being able to critically analyze sources. I think a big part of the US especially is Americans, they don't fact check. They just believe. If it's clicky and it's catchy, we just believe it. Um and this leads us to like a blissful ignorance when it comes to climate. And then another part is I feel like we have a lot of stuff going on with mental illnesses that we're not really exposing in the US. We're not really highlighting how depression affects people. And when you have depression, the last thing you're thinking about is how we're affecting this big ecosystem. You're thinking about, you're dealing with your own situation. And so if we tackle those and we tackle the policy, I hope at the very least um, that we can actually start to take steps to heal our planet and to heal our society. Because I feel like our society is in this state where it's just like a lot of unrest. And going along with your research thing is, I wish you the best of luck in research because I have a research paper that I did and got it approved by a New
Uh,
York graduate professor. Her name is a Dr. Zuzi.
nice.
Yeah, and it was about the law and how like the U.S. is the U.S. is falling in prestige. Nobody likes the U.S. anymore. We're not like we call it the global hegemon. We're not that anymore, and the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes a lot with what you're saying. The U.S. is the U.S. and China are the number one people that are carbon emitted. Like, uh, can't talk.
Mm-hmm.
Number one people that are emitting carbon, and it's like other countries are trying to make these laws, but they're realizing we don't have a voice. The US is not going to do what we tell it to do. So I'm just really inspired by you, and I just really command you to be that person that goes out and do that research that I'm going to rely on when I make the laws, because I can't do it. I can't get
Yeah,
it.
no, yeah, but no, it's still really admirable for you to, be pursuing, law because, one other like big interest that I have in college is politics, and sort of, it's really important like that, sort of having good, people who know policy super well to be the ones that are helping shape sort of the future of our country because. You can, I can be like a scientist, right, and contribute a lot of research, but ultimately my research not have an effect without people in positions of power who are the ones that are helping dictate our policy. So I think for you to be in pre-law is still like a really amazing position
Mm,
to make change happen.
mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because honestly, When I look at the fellow pre-law students, I'll be like, "Ooh, we got the lawyers need some work." Because
Uh,
I feel like what the issue is with our law system, especially, is that our law system incentivize you to be corrupt, and that's all I'm gonna say on that. And so I feel like we have people that start
yeah.
off like me that really wants to make a change, and then they go to law school and realize I either make a change or I feed my family. So,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Hmm. So, what
Hmm.
are the shortcomings in your mind of what comes after?
I think there is definitely two big ones, and I think one of them is sort of one feedback that I receive a lot, and one I feel like is sort of self-identified weakness. I guess the most common feedback is obviously pacing, um, and I really understand why. Like the book is really long. There are really long chapters too, and it does move very slowly. I mean, each entry is one day, so it literally moves one day at a time. And I can understand that because on top of that, my book being really, really dreary, kind of sad, can definitely make the story drag at times. I would say for me personally, as like a self-identified weakness, is dialogue. Like, I do not enjoy writing dialogue a lot, just because it's something that doesn't come really naturally to me, and has always, like, throughout pretty much all my works, been my greatest weakness. And I think that kind of stems from the fact that I do have social anxiety disorder, so I generally don't talk a lot to people, like, in real life. So when it comes to writing characters that are sort of unlike me and are very, like, sociable or very outgoing, it's like I need to sort of get into their minds and sort of get out of sort of my own natural voice. And I still have a tricky time, like, sort of reflecting, like, sort of really capturing their dialogue instead of sort of my dialogue, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like 1,000% agree. And like, this is about, I started writing when I was like 5, so I've been writing for over a decade now. And that was honestly what I was going to say. Like, I didn't have a problem with the pacing at all. Like, I didn't, because I feel like I have written many genres and I read a lot of genres. So different genres require different things. And I do feel like in the publishing industry right now, we're in the YA phase where everything kind of has to conform to a young adult novel and you can't really have too much variety. Um, and in this type of book, honestly, in my opinion, it didn't need to be any faster than it was. Because that's kind of the point. The world is ending and I'm taking it day by day. Um, I'm not like, and I'm writing in my diary. Like, I'm not gonna just like when you're like I have a diary that I write in every day, and I know like life is not exciting every day. Sometimes it's just literally me getting up, going, doing a workout. Like, so I didn't really have a problem with pacing. Now I do understand where people are coming from because, like I said, there are sometimes an hour long chapters, but I don't feel like that's a weakness. I just feel like that's a feature. But I do think the dialogue could be better. And it's something that I used to struggle with a lot too, because what was getting me about the dialogue is the dialogue. It was not so much the dialogue, it was the dialogue tags. It was like sometimes I was like, well, that dialogue tag it wasn't needed, or it's explaining something that I already knew. Like, especially with me when I wrote that Billie Eilish fanfic in my first novel, I used to have like it was like a sarcastic moment between two people, and I used to say he said sarcastically, but the reader, they're not dumb. Most readers would know, like, if these characters are always playing, they could kind of already know that this character is saying that sarcastically, or like The one that gagged me when when I rewrote my novel like all them years ago was the basically it was these two characters in the bed and one of them was whispering to the other and I put he whispered quietly, like of course he's quiet, it's a whisper.
Mm-hmm.
So like I used to struggle with that, but I feel like
Uh,
what I did to get better at that is as I've matured, I kind of realized that I'm not the only person that exists, and people have different opinions than me. And I kind of start to think like, why do they think that way? Because one of the problems in my books was that all the characters were just me, but just a certain part of me. So when I started writing characters that weren't me or that were very different, like an extrovert, well, I'm an extrovert, like introvert characters, um,
mm-hmm.
I it kind of forced me to think like, why are people introverted? And that kind of helped me be like, okay, this character wouldn't say that, or this character would definitely say that, but he would say it like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to approach it. Yeah, it's one that, I definitely try doing just like the opposite way around.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely about the dialogue. I totally agree. I mean, I kind of started, a lot of this book sort of came from my desire to improve on writing dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had like a different series prior to this that I was working on,
Mm-hmm.
and once I introduced new characters, I was really struggling with dialogue, which is why I wanted to sort of I this story originally started as like a side project where I was like, I'm gonna use this story to explore dialogue a lot better, and I got so attached to all my characters here, and it just kind of morphed into my main story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some of what comes after strengths? What are some things you feel like you particularly excelled in?
I will say one thing I really liked about my book is I like the world building a lot. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my issues I had with some other novels is that they felt very derivative when it came to world building. And, obviously this is set in the same universe as an already published series, but I decided to drastically change up the location to sort of put it into the real center of the real center of like the apocalyptic conflict, if you will. Like they're affected by the volcanoes, the earthquakes, the tsunami ties most directly, and sort of how that shapes the world is what something I was really fascinated by because it wasn't something that was explored in sort of those other books. And I think one part that I especially liked writing was like whenever they went sort of down to the sea areas, like all the houses that get flooded as the tide comes in and gets gets sort of destroyed as the tide comes out, and sort of seeing that transformation,
Mm-hmm.
sort of writing about it was something that was really a lot of fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other strength I think is just like sort of I really liked, I guess, like the thematic elements of my story too. I really tried to make this story, it was like really personal to me. If like it tackled a lot of themes that were sort of affecting me at the time when I was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
It talked a lot about, sort of like the idea of being really emotionally honest with people, about being truthful, about a fear of growing up. And, especially on the second half of the book, it dives a lot more into my main characters, like sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
which was all sort of issues that, when I wrote this, I was 17, 18 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of those issues sort of really resonated with me, and is why I sort of add them into the story. And I was really sort of happy with the way they kind of turned out because it felt really authentic, and it felt really personal, and I was really happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Um, yes. That's all I have to say. Yes. Like it was very this book was very refreshing because like I read a lot of dramas, but I usually concentrate them. So like in January I'm reading dystopia. In March I'm reading probably romance novels again, but I concentrate them. And this felt distinct. Like I read a lot of books in the dystopia, and this stood out because it was refreshing. Like it didn't feel like the romance was pushed onto me. It didn't feel like the romance were. I hate in dystopias where like the romance is like the only hope. Like I'm only living because I need to fall in love with XYZ character. Like it didn't feel like that. It felt like this was a big part of my existence, but I also have a family to think of. I also have food I need to eat. Like it just felt more real. So that's definitely one of his strengths. So
Yeah, glad you enjoyed that.
yeah, no problem. Like I said, I love your book. I love it. Like I feel like we always have this little joke in the author community that our books are our babies. I feel like your book is your baby, but this is my adopted son. I'm the goddad. Don't mess with him.
Uh,
Uh, Um. s-
mm, yeah.
So, what are you? Hold on. So, are you happy with his current standing, or do you feel like you need to do some tweaking?
Honestly, like I'm really happy with how the book turned out. Like, I don't think there are really. I mean, there are probably cosmetic changes I could go in and make,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think there are really any major changes. Like, I really want to make. I mean, if I was like redoing the book, without having sort of the sequel already sort of in progress, I think, I would like to have the mom character play a slightly bigger role and have a more clear sort of character arc because I definitely do feel like I neglected her character like a little bit. I think other than that, like I'm really happy with sort of how the book turned out.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah.
do you plan off living off your writing, or do you just kind of want this to be like a secret hobby of yours? Do you have any other career plans?
Yeah, I don't think I would want to live off of my writing just because I do tend to get writer's block pretty badly. So it's like, it's it would be a little too hard for me to make a living off my writing, especially when I have sort of my other academic interests are, you know, more important to me in the sense of like where I want to see my career go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm right now just thinking of making this as sort of this really hobby, and just like where I get to like have a lot of fun trying to write fiction rather than a sort of that career. I mean, obviously in the future, I've already mentioned that I have thought about making it an original, so I potentially could go down this career path. But I think as of the moment, it's sort of a hobby for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I probably won't think about um, really monetizing my book until I've completely finished my series.
Mm-hmm. So, how long did it take you to write the book?
It Yeah, it took me 2 years to write it. I started in like the September of 2019, and then I finished it. I think like a week before I went to college, and I started college in the August of 2021,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's definitely took me quite a long time to write this book.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that came from you being in high school, graduating, going to college, or do you think that's just generally it just takes you a long time to write books?
It's a combination of both. I will say that I think because I was really busy throughout my junior and senior years of high school, I did not have as much time as I would like to write, which contributed to that. I think more generally, I tend to be a pretty slow writer. I would usually post chapters every 2 or so months. I think there's only one time where I actually like really rapid fired like a chapter. I think I was like on a really hot like writing streak, and I wrote like 12,000 words in like a week, and that was like the only exception.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was for like chapter 18 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, yeah, I generally take it pretty slow. I like to sort of think about my chapters, and yeah, and especially in chapters that are really dialogue heavy, it takes me a while to get comfortable with the dialogue I want
Mm-hmm.
to be presenting as part of my story.
Mm-hmm. So while writing this book, did the readers influence it at all, or did you just kind of was like, I have this idea, I'm writing this down?
Um, did make a handful of concessions to my readers.
Mm-hmm.
I think my most loyal like reader that has really been there for my beginnings, that she really loved Mira and like Leon's relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I did up the ante like a little bit between them
Mm-hmm.
and have them have a little more screen time than I originally planned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were some thematic elements that I did, you know, tone down. I think some stuff concerning more topics that could be, I guess, a little controversial in the sense, especially around, like religion and stuff like that. I did tone a bit down just because some of my fans were pretty religious, and I didn't want to like super offend them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, like I kind of stuck with sort of my original plans. Especially I think when it came to the last chapter, I was a bit hesitant about it. Like some parts of it, like I talk about like Pokemon and stuff like that people might not be super familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it's like something that you're not supposed to do, but then I was like, it really brought like a lot of authenticity and realism to the story. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna keep these details even if people don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. So in that same line, seeing as this work is a fanfic, how did you like maintain that originality and not try to lean too much onto the original work?
Yeah, I think one part of it was that even when I was writing Hunger Games fan fiction, I don't like to base my works off of characters that are already established. Like, I like to really do sort of my own characters, because I think with already pre-established characters, it's a bit restrictive when it comes to sort of how you can write character arcs with them
Mm-hmm.
and the types of personalities they can have.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really like to write my own characters, and that's how I really kept a lot of distance between sort of my work and the original series. And I think just other than that, just really changing up the setting a lot. None of her, none of the original books really took place on a coastal community,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I really highlighted what are like the specific challenges that people alongside the coast will face or have faced as a result of the moon coming closer to the Earth, and especially what challenges have people faced on the West Coast, given the amount of volcanoes, given the risk of earthquakes that is inherent in the West Coast. And I think those two factors really upped up like the danger
Mm-hmm.
of my book, and really helped separate like a lot of conflict from sort of repeating from her book to mine.
Mm-hmm. I will say that like you're like West Coast, and then you have East Coast, Boston just flooded. Like I'm not gonna lie, I did feel a little bit attacked, but it is what it is.
Oh, sorry about that.
Like I'm just like, oh, I
I'm
wouldn't
sure
even.
you would have survived.
No, I'm like, well, I wonder what I'm doing. I'm probably kicking it, probably somewhere in a bunker, Boston, flooded.
Uh,
And then it was like he didn't even. I was like, he didn't even say East Coast. He specifically said Boston. Yeah, I felt a little bit attacked,
yeah,
but
no, it's
we are right there. We
yeah, no,
literally
it's
are right there. So it's like,
uh,
so
yeah,
what
poor East
changed?
Coast.
Yeah, poor East Coast. We need more representation. What changed between the first and final draft of your novel, and why did you change it?
I would say that like really nothing much changed. I will say like when it comes to like sort of like first and final draft, if you're referring to like what I have so far, then yeah, nothing really changed. But I changed when it like came to sort of where I conceptualized my story was going when I first started writing it.
Mm-hmm.
It was really weird. Like I had some really weird ideas about like which direction my story was going, and I'm just very happy that I did not plot it out so it would go in those directions because it was just really strange, like in hindsight to think about. I would say that one thing that I've thought about changing a lot is sort of the first few chapters to sort of match the writing style of the later ones.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, I decided against it. I think part of it is like I'm really hesitant to sort of remove details in these first chapters that are relevant for later chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the sort of the stiffer dialogue, a lot shorter chapters, and like a bit less sort of vivid description than what comes near the end, really matches my main character's sort of emotional detachment, if you will, right in the sort of beginning of the story where he feels really anxious and really lost.
Okay. So, do you have any unfinished projects, and are you gonna finish them?
I do have one other like project is it was the series I was talking about where it was my main series and then I was using sort of what comes after as like a dialogue practice. It's Zombie Diaries 2019
Mm-hmm.
is unfinished and it will never be finished. I'm going to be honest. I just leave it up because it was my first attempt at writing an apocalypse novel and it really has a special place in my heart. But a lot of the ideas and thematic elements that I plan on exploring there have been really folded into my book and its sequel, and oh, there's not really like a purpose to that novel unless I want to feel like I'm just retreading the same ground
Mm-hmm.
again.
Okay, this is like a weird off the wall question because I did like okay when I first started reading the novel, I'm a speed reader. That's how I read so many. So I like for the first like chapter or two, I was just like, why? I was glitching a little, and then I realized Maya is a different person. Um, then May, I believe is her name.
Oh,
Yes, I was like,
yeah, Mira and
yeah,
May,
Mira and
yeah.
May. I was like, that's. I was like, is she in college or is she in high school? Like, what is going on with her? Then I finally realized they were two different people. So how did you come up with your characters' names? And do they like mean anything?
Um, yeah, I mean, we can start with my main
Mm-hmm.
character, Neil. I mean, my name starts with an N, so I just kept it like that. Mira and May are like a funny story attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
So May is like a pseudonym that my sister uses because everyone mispronounces her name when she like gets coffee or like takeout.
Mm-hmm.
And she like most closely resembled my younger sister back then when she was like kind of a little angsty as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was like a really fitting name. And then Mira was my sister's enemy in middle
Mm-hmm.
info, if you will, for this.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I thought it was also kind of connects to just like a really sort of really minor random story in my life where I really wanted to make the M&M pun in my story with like Mira Neil May. It just connects to the fact that like in one of my classes, one of our teachers just like didn't like how people were getting left out in the group, so she just grouped people by alphabet, and then me and two other people whose names started with M were in a group, and we just called ourselves the M&Ms.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then the rest of the characters, I do have the names for like the mom and dad character, but I'm gonna be honest, like I only mentioned those names once,
Once.
and
Yeah, I was
like
trying to say
it's
that.
super. Yeah, they're like literally only mentioned once. I think when they meet with Leon,
Mm-hmm.
they do mention their first names. But other than that, like I literally just refer to them mom and dad because like that's what's natural, and introducing their first names would be just like I don't even know what's a good way to introduce their first name. If I'm gonna be honest,
Mm-hmm.
and I never really thought deeply about them.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of like Charles, same thing. My friend in high school, his name started with a C. I was like, I'm just gonna roll with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Leon, I don't know. I just really like the name. Yeah, there's nothing much to it.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was a cool name.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Me, like I'm a weirdo. Like I like their names mean like three different things. Like you'll look up the name and you'll be like, wow, that was kind of what their story was about. You'll look up the meaning of the name, but like that's what their story was about. And then like you'll spell it backwards, and then it just means like something that went along with like their side story. Like I don't, I spend forever thinking up names.
Wow.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
I don't think so. I just think I'm just a weirdo. Like who cares? Honestly.
No, I mean lots of like stories do like the like double naming thing. I mean one example I think is like the Hunger Games. You know Katniss's designer, right? Like Cinna.
Mm-hmm.
Like his name comes from like I forgot if it's like Roman or Greek, but it's like this guy who betrayed the emperor, right?
Yeah.
And then he does that same thing, and it's like
Yeah.
there's this like cool parallel
Mm-hmm.
that's going on between sort of the name, character's name, and sort of how it works out of their actions. And I
Yeah.
thought that was like really cool. And I think like people who think of that are like, wow, they're like actually really thinking about this.
Well, thank you, but I'm telling you, like for the one reader that we have that goes like that, we have a million other readers that's just like, oh, that's a cool name. So sometimes I'm just thinking like, is this worth the time? Like I spent like an hour naming all of my main characters, and like they all like one of the big things in the book is like how I don't want to get too much to it because that's spoilers, but like all of their names relate to a what is that thing called? A tarot card, and like it's like you have to scramble their name to find out the tarot card, and then like if you figure out the order the tarot cards go in, you kind of just know the whole book series. Um,
Oh wow.
so it's like for the one person that finds that out, shout out, like you're my true fan, but who is gonna do that? Like who is taking their time out to do that? But I need to,
Yeah.
I need to start doing what you do. Like, oh, I have a D in my name, so I need to make my character start with D. But I think for my Billie Eilish fanfic, I think I didn't like I wasn't that deep into it yet. So I really did name people based off of people I knew. Like one of my characters was my crush at the time's name, but like their nickname. I was just like, yeah, I was just a mess. I'm a mess still. I just am a mess. That's my identifier. But okay. So are there like any special editions of any of your works? And if so, when and where could we get them?
No, there are no special editions, unfortunately.
Boo.
I was thinking about. I know. I'm sorry. I was thinking about writing a spin-off,
Mm-hmm.
but of I don't know. I'm just gonna say major spoilers ahead. The spin-off of what happens at the end of the book when Charles leaves. I was gonna maybe write like a sort of short book about like a series of letters he sends back character detailing his travels.
Mhm.
But then I kind of decided against it because I wanted the fate to remain a little ambiguous.
Yeah, we love
Yeah,
it. Hmm. You know what? I applaud you
but
for that.
yeah.
Because one of my main like critiques of the authors that I have on here is like learning. Because most of the authors I have on here are wildly successful in their novels, and them learning how to let go and to start anew. Like it's cool to have a sequel or to have a series, but sometimes the characters are they're done. Their story is over. It's time for you to write a new one.
Mhm.
And for you to be like, no. I I really, especially in my younger years, struggled with saying no. So for you to be like that,
Uh,
it's just top tier for me. Okay, so we're
oh,
nearing
thanks. Thanks.
you're welcome, you're welcome. We're nearing the end of the podcast, unfortunately. So these are our last five questions.
Mhm.
Dun 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 dun. So what advice would you give to your past self? This could be something in general or it can be something tied to your writing, but just let us know.
Yeah, I would say, um, when it comes to writing, I would tell my past self, like, you should get more comfortable with, writing what you like to read and writing what you know, because I think one thing I really struggled with when I was started off writing was that I would not be emotionally connecting with a lot of the struggles of my character. I felt like I was writing their struggles because like these are what like the struggles they're supposed to be going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to sort of writing what you know, it's a strategy that definitely really worked with me. And I think it would have been something that was super helpful when I first started.
Mm-hmm.
And to just be like, hey, it's okay if your characters are not sort of, they're not like sort of like the cookie cutter like
Mm-hmm.
white protagonist, the really strong, the really brave one that has like like sort of the you can like kind of predict their flaws, and to it's okay to be a little more personal with
Mm-hmm.
your work.
Okay. Honestly, if I could tell my past self one thing, as far as writing, I would tell him just write. Like, I feel like the problem with me in the past was definitely that I just was too scared to be wrong or too scared to write something bad that I didn't realize that that was just an experience that every writer goes to. We all write our bad fanfic and then become Stephen King's, but uh, it's like we need that experience. So I would tell my past self, just write. It's going to be bad. Some of it's going to be good, but it's experience nevertheless. Um,
Yeah, no, that's great advice.
so if you could meet your main cast, what would you say to them?
It's a hard question. Um, I would tell, my main character, like, he shouldn't just, like, don't give up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think at the end of the novel, he is really, he feels like he's been sort of left all alone, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing I want to tell him is, like, oh, you shouldn't give up. Like, this is not going to be, like, a permanent situation, and things can, could look up. And then, for Charles, I think the generic one is really good luck. Like the journey to, the journey to Texas or New Mexico is it's gonna be a very brutal one for him, and I really wish him good luck on that because
Mm-hmm.
that is a lot of distance to go,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not much fuel left, and he's probably gonna have to walk a bunch of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, good luck to him. And then I think for Mira, I would say tell her, she should keep fighting for her dreams because I think for her, she's one of the most, ambitious and the most really, the one that really has the biggest belief in humanity and the one that really wants the world to be for this utopian vision. And whether she is right or wrong, I still think that it's really worth, fighting for that, better future, not just for her family, but for everyone.
Mhm. Anything to the mom and the dad?
Mom and dad, the dad, I would just be like, it's okay to be vulnerable. Like, I
Mhm.
think one aspect to him is it's definitely a lot of like I talk a lot about like toxic masculinity when it comes to him,
Mhm.
and it's a topic I more or less explore a lot more in my second book when it comes to sort of trauma, because he was the one that was down there on the beach on the first day,
Mhm.
and there was a whole bunch of beach gatherings on there, and he's really hiding his emotions a lot and lashing out, and that's one thing I would tell him is like it's okay to be vulnerable, and it doesn't make you sort of any less manly.
Mhm.
And then, for the mom character, that's really hard because I think that's kind of like the big gripe I have with my book is I feel like out of all the characters, she feels the most like underdeveloped in a
Mhm.
sense. I really struggle with what to tell her.
Mhm.
But maybe like something along the lines of, I think um, she should, not always try to be the one that's in the compromised position and really
Mhm.
take her own position out, because I think a lot of times in the book she's often in a very conflict resolution or mode between the dad and Mira, who are
Mhm.
like on opposite ends and always butt heads. And I think the mom character, like, really her stepping up would probably be like for the net benefit of the family, and that's definitely something she does. But I think her taking a more leadership role would be amazing.
Mhm.
And then for the younger sister, I don't know, uh, just don't be stupid. She's definitely like the most reckless of all the characters,
Mhm.
but I think she definitely does a lot of the right things, because she's the one that's the most willing to survive. But she does take quite a few risks, and I would want to tell her like, don't do something too dangerous, please.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, if I could tell them something, honestly, I don't have advice for everybody. The only thing, like, you hit it right on the nail with Charles. I was just gonna say that. Good luck, because baby, you got a little journey you got to go. Um, far as Mira, I was gonna tell her like this is no going back to normal. Like we've already been there, done that. Like there's this society. We're not gonna have another society like we had. So be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Be who you want to be. There's no normal anymore. There's no need to hold back what you want to say and what you want to do for someone else. And I really do like how in some of the chapters she actually starts to take initiative. She actually starts to say like her opinions, but I do feel like she could have been more like, you know, this is me. And I do understand like that's the whole parent child dynamic where children are always gonna like kind of want validation from their parent. But I do feel like a part of maturing and becoming an adult is realizing that regardless of your parents' validation, you are your own independent person that needs its own ideals. For Neil, honestly, I would say you have so much life to live, and things that
Mm-hmm.
just seem dreary or things that seem that they matter a whole much now. In 25 years, you're gonna look back on and be like, "Wow, I cared so much about that. I don't even think about that anymore." Um,
Mm-hmm.
far as the younger sister, honestly, same advice. Like it's like, girl, you're in an apocalypse. Girl, chill. Like just chill out. Take a breather. Think it through. Write it down and see if you want to do it tomorrow. Like that's my main advice. Write that down and see if you still want to do that action in 2 days. um, and for far as like the parents, I would talk to them collectively and talk about how we're in an apocalypse. We need to be a unit. And I feel like the parents they often bicker and fight and then the mother just is like, okay, whatever, you're right.
Mm,
Um and I just feel like my advice to them is just has to be like, if you want your children to succeed, we need you to be a stronger unit. So figure out what y'all got going on and the differences y'all have and put that aside so that we can survive. Cause honestly, y'all are our biggest asset in this in surviving because we got the two youngest, they're kids. I mean, they can help a little, but not really. We got the two oldest, they're the grandparents. They're not doing much. And then you have Mira, which is she's better, but you have a lot more experience. So we need you to get this together. We need y'all to be a pair, not just two people that are married. But I do feel like towards especially the marriage chapter, I feel like they really started to get it together because in the beginning I was just sitting here like, if this wasn't the end of the world, y'all probably would have been divorced. But yeah,
uh,
so can you give us a preview of your sequel and why did you decide to continue writing?
yeah, so I think there is a lot more that I could have added to my story because where I left it off, which again, major spoilers, Charles
Mm-hmm.
is, really forced to leave at the end of the book. And, where that leaves my main character, he has a lot of anger, a lot of sadness within him. And, so a lot of the sequel really tackles this sort of emotional journey of him to sort of forgiving himself, his parents, and especially that kind of teaser I left at the end about the letter that
Mm-hmm.
Charles left him, like what's in that letter. Um, and I think more broadly, this is just like the what happens in sort of what remains here is their family is now sort of faced with a reckoning, and this new family decides to, show up at their door, and they're offering engineering and medical skills in exchange for food, and this is a real big challenge to the family's really isolationist stance
Mm-hmm.
and how they navigate through it sort of decides how do they want the future to look like
Mm-hmm.
for them. And a lot of the new book often looks at especially the idea of trust, where are they genuine? Are they going to betray you? Who should be in charge of the community? Who should be the one deciding the future? And because I think it tackles a lot different thematic grounds compared to the first book, I do think that a sequel was warranted, and I do think it pushes the story into different directions.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed that you do have like three other titles on your Wattpad account. Can you give us a brief description of those two?
Yeah, so the first one I already mentioned is Zombie Diaries. It's not never going to be revived. I just keep it for legacy's sake, because it was my first book. It was my first apocalypse book. I'm happy with it, even though I never finished it. The other two are actually poetry that I used to write a lot. The smaller one was just like my first attempt at writing free verse poetry, and then my second one is my longer extended collection of poetry. I will say for that one, it's a lot. I think my poetry style is very visual, I guess, and it's a bit. I guess because I like to write stories. It's also structured as kind of a story,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you will. It's really sort of romance focused poetry. If that's I guess that's something interesting. I would say I would say that I'm not really happy with my last chapter from that poetry book. I do keep up the poems from that chapter, but I do like the first three chapters, the first three sort of, I wouldn't call them chapters, like three sections
Mm-hmm.
of my poetry book. But yeah, those are kind of the only three other works there. It's mostly the bulk of like my work is in the sort of what comes after series.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm probably gonna go jump in there and read and read your poetry. I'm not gonna lie. I love poetry. I tried to write poetry, but I'm a very structuralized, planny person, and that is not the type of person you want to be when you're writing poetry. So a lot of my work I scrap, but I'm definitely gonna check it out now. I'll tell you what I think.
Uh, mm,
Mm,
yeah, I would really say stick with the first three sections. I am not a fan of how I wrote my last section. I just keep up the chapters just because I wrote them and they should be up, but I think the quality goes down significantly after the first three. The three sort of sections, yeah,
mm,
is what I'll say about it.
mm. So this is our last question of this episode. And as always,
No.
I know I like talking to authors. Like I can talk all day. What can we expect from you in the future?
That is very interesting. I would say, okay, first of all, definitely expect me to complete the What Comes After series. In terms of my plans for the series, right now I am 1.5 books in to a four book series.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm hoping that I can finish what remains here before I graduate college,
Mm-hmm.
and then I want to get the rest of the book series done in like maybe the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like other works of fiction I'm thinking of writing, is I think one thing that I definitely kind of struggled with when it comes to sort of how I write apocalypses is that what comes after is what I would call a gray apocalypse, which is like sort of about the end of the world because like there's really no going back from like volcanic, super eruptions, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally killed off a lot of life on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten a bit, it's a bit gloomy to write about that, and I've always wanted to write a sort of green apocalypse story, which is like about the rebirth of the world,
Mm-hmm.
sort of once it kind of ends. One idea that I've been juggling with is a sort of, it is a zombie apocalypse series, but I really want to do like a sort of pirates-esque zombies apocalypse, if you will. Like, it is contemporary, but it's like instead of setting a lot of zombie apocalypse, they're set in like the cities or the suburbs. I want to set it off like on like sort of like the islands off the coast of Florida, and then you sort of have humans profess to be like these little pirates that are kind of raiding like island communities, and you have like island communities trying to like build, but they have to go to like the mainland to scavenge and deal with zombies. And I don't know, I thought that was like that's like a cool. I don't know, I find that concept pretty cool, and like I've been like kind of juggling it around my mind to be like, how can I make this work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I love, love, love your book, and I would love to have you back for your sequels. Is there anything
All
you
right. Yeah,
else?
that would be great.
Is there anything else you want to say before I end it here?
No, it was just like a real pleasure being able to speak about my book, and especially with someone who's read the entire thing. Like, you know, I know I keep repeating this, but like it it's so rare that like I know like people who finished my book, and I think this was a really amazing conversation, and yeah, I'm really glad you reached out.
Hmm. Thank you. And thank you for being here. All right, that's it.